Welcome back, Christ Church, to our weekly series of how do we put the Sunday morning teaching into practical terms. How do we live this out? Today's text comes from Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. And it reads, "Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, whom I long to see, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my beloved. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to live in harmony in the Lord. Indeed, true companion, I ask you also, help these women who have shared my struggle in the cause of the gospel, together with Clement, as well as the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life."
So there were several key things that we pulled away from the teaching this morning, and one of those was that we as the church are to actively fight alongside each other for the cause of the gospel.
You know, it's like a modern day gladiator. We are to not be ashamed of the gospel. We need to be that true companion who helps restore. And we also need the ability to endure when relationships become difficult. You know, these three different aspects are in these verses. And it is key that you all talk about those things. So again, how do we fight like a modern day gladiator in not being ashamed of the gospel? How do we live out being a true companion who helps restore relationships? And also, how do we gain the ability to endure when relationships become difficult? Because these relationships can become difficult and you don't want to be worn down, but you need endurance. Just like in athletics, just like being a gladiator, there is endurance involved.
And that's the understanding, Stephen, that the gospel itself is that core value that unites us. One of the other things we talked about was to be actively aware of what divides us and remind one another of what unites us. For example, I pronounce it Syntyche, he pronounces it Syntyche. We're divided here, but the fact is it's not important because it's not a big deal. You guys want to find out what is it in your relationships that might be causing division among maybe husbands and wives, if you have some tension there, relationships at work, things. With the world we're living in right now, there's a lot of division that could potentially happen, and that right there is what the enemy uses to pull us apart. And we have to be reminded of that thing, the gospel, that does unite us, and be able to remind each other that the gospel itself is the thing that we all have in common. Not just what we have in common, but it's the core value of what makes us who we are. And then from there, be able to evaluate when we start having that division, when we start having those differences, to ask ourselves, is this worth fighting for? Is this a hill worth dying for, as we talked about this morning?
Yeah. So our third and final takeaway from this morning was this third one: consistency in our words and actions in order to preserve unity of the spirit and bond of peace. Man, being consistent, that takes all these other things we talked about. Endurance. If you want to be consistent in the way you treat one another, in the way you speak to one another, you have to develop that. That takes a lot of action, takes a lot of planning. And of course, the benefit of that is preserving the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. You know, we are to be peacemakers. We are to also be in step with the Spirit. And we can't do that if we're fighting among ourselves. And so one thing that I just thought of that I think, you know, Pastor Chris teaches all the time is keep small things small and big things big. You know, if you notice that you're fighting over something, or that you're arguing or you're disagreeing over something, identify if that's a big thing or if it's a little thing. If it's a little thing and you've made a big deal out of it, there's some underlying issue, and maybe the gospel is being ignored, because that is certainly a temptation that we can fall prey to, is not keeping the gospel in the forefront, but keeping our own motives and our own wants and selfish desires in the forefront. So thank you, Patch, again. And Christ Church, hope you have a great day. And please talk about these takeaways and how you can develop them and apply them in your life. Thank you.